Hello everyone! In today's video I'm going to show you exactly how to use Terraform variables in tfvars files. We will use real examples, making it easy for you to manage your infrastructure efficiently. But first, let's talk about what Terraform variables are. Terraform variables are user-defined values that make your infrastructure configurations reusable and more flexible. They allow you to parameterize your configurations, avoiding hard-coded values. And by using variables, you make it easy to manage your environment, scale your configurations, and also make your code more clear. There are many types of variables such as string, number, boolean, list, set, map, and object, and I'll show you these in action in a couple of seconds. Whenever you are defining a variable, you have to declare a variable block, and in this variable block you will add a name, you will add a type, a default value, a description, and a validation. All of these fields are actually optional apart from the name one. So this is a simple declaration of a variable. So we have here the variable region. I've added a type string. I've added a description to it, just saying this is the AWS region. And I also added the default value. Variable values are actually added in a particular order. So we can see it right here. First, you have the default value from the variable block. Then we can use like environment variables if you want. There is a special file that we will spend a lot of time talking about during this video that is called terraform.tfvars. Then is the terraform.tfvars.json. Then you can have anything.auto.tfvars, and then you can use a CLI argument -var or -var-file. Variables are actually used in many ways. You can use them to remove hard-coded values, which would be like the most common use case. You can use them for interpolation, to combine two variables in a single one. You can use them in conditional expressions, to take decisions based on the variable value. You can actually use them in functions as well. So whenever you're using a function, again, you can take advantage of variables, and you can also use them in loops. Here are some of the best practices when it comes to variables. They should have a consistent naming. Because imagine if you have like a big Terraform project, if you have hundreds of variables, if they don't have consistent names, you won't know what a particular variable does, and you will spend a lot of time debugging stuff and trying to understand what has happened there. Variables should also be documented, and you can document them in two ways. Basically, you can write the documentation yourself, or you can use the Terraform docs plugin that will actually generate documentation for you and for your variables as well. And you can also use like sensitive variables, and this is very useful, especially when you are dealing with passwords and other things like that. There are also some advanced variable types, so these are like complex data structures, and here we find a list of maps and map of objects. So now that you have a high-level overview of how Terraform variables look like, what types you can use, what are the best practices, and where you should use them, let's jump in and see them in action. So let's start with a very simple variable. This is my favorite number. I'll just say type equals to number, and I'm going to add it a default value of 7. Now if I run this code, nothing will happen, but what I can do is I actually can define an output. So let's say my favorite number, and the value would be equal to var.myFavoriteNumber. So now if I run terraform init and then terraform apply, we are going to see that my favorite number is 7 right here in the outputs. Now I will define a terraform.tfvars file. And in here, we don't have to do an entire variable block declaration. What we will do is, after the variable has been declared with its name right here, we'll adjust the name and we will add the value. So let's say 10. And because this is in the tfvars file, this takes precedence over the default value from right here. So we will see now that my new favorite number will actually be 10. And this is the case. Let's declare another variable right now. So this will be a string variable. Let's say name, type equals to string, and the default value would be Bob, let's say. Again, this doesn't do anything on its own. We have to, again, declare an output, and I'll do the same for it. I'll say name, and the value would be var.name. So if I do a terraform apply again, you will see the name is now equal to Bob. And again, if I do it in tfvars, let's say Charlie in here, the name would change to Charlie in this case. And this is exactly what's happening here. Let's now take a look at some more complex variable types. So let's look into lists, for example. So I have here a variable, my list, and this will be type of list of, you can do list of number directly. And the default value would be, let's say 1, 5, 6, 8, 10, 3, 2, something like this. So let's now combine it with a for loop and an if block. So we will do it in a locals block in here, and we would say something like my even numbers is equal to for I in var.mylist, I if I modulo 2 is equal to 0. So this will get all the even numbers from my list, because this is like the modulo operator and it takes the reminder of the division. And if this is equal to 0, when you divide something by 2, that means the number is even. Again, we will have to define an output. So let's say my even numbers, and this would be equal to local.myEvenNumbers. If I run terraform apply again, we will see that we have an error because I've added strings in here, which doesn't make any sense. So let's do terraform apply again, and we can see that the list of my even numbers has only even numbers right now. Again, in tfvars, we can override these values. So we can say my list for this case, and we can say, let's say 10, 0, 2, 3, 5, 7. And if I run it again, you will see that my even numbers are the ones from here. Now let's use variables in count blocks. So for example, we will do an AWS instance. Let's say this is called this. Add a count, and this will be var my number of instances. We would do an instance type equals to t2.micro, and we would also do an AMI equal to something random, because I'm not going to apply this code. Now I'm just going to declare this variable, but I'm not going to add any parameters in here. So I'll just go in tfvars and say my number of instances is equal to 3, something like this. And because we are using the AWS provider, we have to also declare the provider. So we do provider AWS and say region is equal to, let's say, US East 1. And now we are ready to run Terraform init. And now we are also ready to run a Terraform plan. So let's check it out. We have 1, 2, 3 EC2 instances that will be created based on this value. If I change this to 30, for example, and do Terraform plan again, we are going to see that we have 30 instances to add. I'm not going to scroll through everything because this is a lot, so it doesn't make any sense. In the same way, you could even use for each with variables. So let's just comment this out and do copy paste in here and say for each is equal to, let's do var my instances and say this is each dot value dot instance type, and this will be each dot value dot AMI. So we could do something more complex here and say my instances, of course after I declare the variable first. So my instances, this will be map of object, and in here we'll say instance type is a string and AMI is also a string. So now I can go here and say instance 1, this will have an instance type of t2.micro, AMI, let's say AMI 1, and let's copy paste this block and say instance 2 with an instance type t3.micro, this will have an AMI 2. And if I go right now and say Terraform plan again, we will see that we are going to create two instances, but in this case they will have a different instance type. So this is t3.micro and AMI2, and this will be t2.micro and AMI1. One of the best practices when it comes to using Terraform and using Terraform variables is to generate documentation. This is where tools such as terraform.tfvars comes into handy. Alternatively, you can send your code to a GenAI tool and it can help you generate documentation, but tfdocs is built in for Terraform and it knows Terraform really well. So let's see it in action. So to use it, we'll do terraform docs, markdown table, and let's redirect the output into readme.md. Made a mistake, forgot about this dot right here. So now if you check the readme.md, and we can actually preview it, we can see that we are using the AWS provider, we can see the resource, we can see what inputs do we have, if they have default values, if they are required or not, and stuff like that. So this is very, very easy to leverage. And at the same time, if I, let's say, remove all of this, and I'm just starting with terraform.tfvars, and I don't want to write all of these variables, we can use terraform docs to actually generate our tfvars file. To do that, we will do terraform docs tfvars HCL in terraform.tfvars. And as you can see, this was easily populated. Another important thing that you should know when you're using Terraform variables and Terraform tfvars especially is that you can have multiple tfvars files. So we can do like a prod.tfvars, and let's copy everything from here and this one and just change some of the values just to make it clear what's happening. So if I would like to load this one, the prod.tfvars, instead of terraform.tfvars, I would do terraform plan -var -file equals to prod.tfvars and enter. Oops, I have an error right here. I forgot to remove a comma, so let's do it again. And we can see that the new file is getting loaded. We can see we have changes to outputs. We can see that only one EC2 instance will be created. You can also leverage variables to conditionally create resources. So for example, we can again go and say AWS instance and do another one right here and say count equals to var.create instance $1 0. And let's also do like the instance type and the AMI from above because it's just easier in this way. And now let's declare this variable. So create instance, this will be a type bool. So if I say create instance is false, you're going to see that I'm going to only create a single instance if I do the Terraform plan with this var file. But if I put this to true, we're going to see that we are going to create another instance that will have like the t2.micro instance type and something random as the AMI. So something random and t2.micro. Throughout this video, you saw me use a single file for both the code logic and the variables, but you shouldn't do that in a real life use case. Variables should be always kept in a separate file. Usually it's called Variables.tf. So let's do that in our configuration as well. Now let's copy all the variables from main.tf to this new file that we have defined right here. Still have a couple more to go. Now that I've added the variables in a separate file, it's very easy to do a head-to-head between the variables.tf file and the terraform.tfvars file. So always in the variables.tf file, you will declare the variables, you will add their type, you will add their parameters in there, you will add a default value if that's necessary, you will add descriptions and other things like that. In the terraform.tfvars, however, you cannot actually declare variables, you will always just add the values of those variables. So terraform.tfvars will always be for the values and variables.tf will be for the variable definitions. Let's now talk a little bit about the best practices when it comes to variables in Terraform. So again, the first thing that you should always do is have a separate file for your variables. You can even have multiple files if your configuration is getting big, but usually if your configuration is getting too big, it's a problem with the configuration, so that means that you should try to actually split it into smaller chunks. So again, the first thing would be to have a separate file for all of the variables, and let's just go through a variable declaration to just, again, see what are the best practices for it. So the first thing that you'll see here is that you have to add a name for that variable, and you should always have a very descriptive name for the variable. Because imagine if you have hundreds of variables, it will be very hard to understand what's happening to them. So the first thing, and I will take a note here, so keep your variables in a separate file, usually Variables.tf. Next one, use descriptive names. So let's do something for a region. This will be from Europe, so let's say EU region. The next thing would be to always use a type for your variables. So it makes it easier for people to understand. So even though this is an optional field, it makes it really easy for people to understand what kind of type this variable will receive. So in this case, this will be a string. You should always use a description because it makes it, again, very easy for other people to understand what's happening in your configuration. This is my EU region. You should always try to use default values as much as it's possible. You don't have to overuse them. Not all the variables should have a default value because you may require inputs from the users that are consuming your Terraform code or your Terraform modules. But whenever there is a chance to add a default, add it, because this makes your configuration easier to use and it's more flexible. So let's say use a default value when appropriate. So for this one, let's say this is EU West 1. If your tfvars files contain sensitive information, try not to push them to your VCS. I've even seen people saying that it's not a best practice to push tfvars in any case. I don't really agree with that. In some cases, it makes sense to push the tfvars to your VCS system, but if you are using sensitive values, don't do it. So let's also take a note here. Don't add tfvars files to your VCS system if they have sensitive values. Because we are talking about sensitive values, another good practice would be to don't hardcode sensitive values. Imagine you are using a database and you have to add a password to it. The best way to go about it would be to use the random password resource if you're using only Terraform native code. If you're using secrets managers, that would be way better, of course. Another best practice would be to use variable validations. So variables have another block called validation, and in here you have a condition, and then you have an error message. So we could say something like length of var EU region must be longer than, let's say, 6 characters. And the error message is you have a typo in your region. So basically what I've done here is I'm checking the string that I received for the EU region variable, and if it's greater than 6, it's okay. If it's not, it will say that you have a typo in your region and you should fix it. So we can now run it and see it in action. Let's just do a Terraform apply directly. This will be false. And you see I'm having no issues, but if I do something like EU-1 and do an apply again, and if I add the value for this one, you will see that you have a typo in your region. Last but not least, if you have expressions that you need to reuse throughout your configuration, you should use a locals block. Even though you are referencing variables inside of it, save that expression to a local variable and then reuse it all over the place. Spacelift can also help you take care of your Terraform variables. So whenever you define a Terraform stack, you can just go to the environment tab right here and you can declare environment variables. Just as you would do in the terminal, make sure you precede them with tf_var_ and the name of the variable. You can add the value in here, mark it as a secret, and that's it. You just click on create and you're good to go. At the same time, if you want to reuse variables all over the place, you can use context. So you can create a context, and in that context you can create a variable, and basically these contexts can be attached to how many stacks you want, making it easy for you to attach the same variables over and over again without having to write the code as you would normally do in Terraform. So you'll just add a variable, again preceded with tfvar. Let's say we want to do a region, let's not make it a secret, US East 1, save, and now all the stacks that have this context attached, they will use that particular variable. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified when new videos are posted. I'm Flavius. See you the next time.